The top business stories, live from the Sky Newsroom. The spring statement that definitely isn't a budget, that's according to the Chancellor. But what can we actually expect tomorrow? The UK's first ever autonomous construction robot arrives on site. Millwall has become the first British football club to launch its own mobile phone network. Plus, we'll discuss if the drop in Tesla sales really has anything to do with its cars or its owner. Very good morning on this Tuesday, Business Live. With me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, this time tomorrow, companies up and down the country will be waiting to hear how the Chancellor delivers her spring statement, what is in it and what the consequences are. The Treasury have made it clear that it is by no means a budget. But whichever way you look at it, Rachel Reeves has a work cut out for her with both Trump tariffs looming and little wriggle room when it comes to the measures she needs to set out with fiscal headrooms. The Chancellor has already announced she'll be setting aside around £2 billion for affordable housing and slimming down the civil service. So what else can we expect? Let's speak to Hital Mehta, who is Head of Economic Research at St James's. Very good morning to you. What do you think? What else can we expect? We know a little bit of what we can expect, which is the world has changed. What does that mean in detail, do we reckon?
So in some ways, we see a continuation of what we had at the autumn budget in October last year. We flagged then that weak growth, higher interest rates are all going to put quite a big squeeze on the Chancellor. And now roll forward a few months, there are no easy choices. I think what we're likely to see is spending restraint. So the last budget, there was a spending increase, which was a positive surprise, I guess, and a boost to the economy that people weren't expecting at the time. And I think the Chancellor is going to have to roll that back to some extent. Tax changes probably aren't on the agenda because that would probably take what is a spring statement into budget territory. But I do think that there is also the spending review later on in the year, which I think the Chancellor is hoping she can kind of just announce enough to kind of kick the can down the road till June.
Interesting that you use the phrase there, spending constraints. Some others might well suggest austerity. In the end, I mean, we are looking effectively at departmental cuts, aren't we?
Yes, I think in real terms, it is quite possible that we will see some departments see a spending cut. Obviously, there are protected departments and where spending was expected to increase modestly, but the unprotected departments are likely to see cuts. And it's just worth bearing in mind that these fiscal rules are really heavily tied to balancing the kind of the day-to-day budget against the tax revenues that the Chancellor receives, and that is actually a very binding constraint. And there's also chatter about whether these fiscal rules themselves could be revised. They were only introduced a few months ago, and most chancellors have breached fiscal rules, and we've had new sets introduced by almost every new chancellor. But I don't think that is possible tomorrow.
Yeah,
certainly would be a very big surprise if they did.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that this Labour government have made it very clear they don't want to go down the same route, if you like, of Liz Truss. But at the same time, the argument from the government fundamentally will be tomorrow, given where we are in global affairs, that the world has changed, and so different decisions need to be made. But on the backdrop of that, of the spring statement, things are pretty tough out there. As I say, we've got potentially tariffs on the UK as early as next week. April 2nd seems to be Donald Trump's chosen day. And also, the UK economy is not exactly in a robust state at the moment.
Yes, there are obviously global factors that are outside of the government's control, but there are things that, I guess, the state of the public finances inherited, the kind of weakness in terms of the, say, productivity, which, we know the OBR have a quite optimistic view on productivity, but as with every update, we see that is not coming through in the data. That does create quite a difficult environment for the UK growth to outperform, and then to actually have the tax revenues that allow for, let's say, an easier budget time. And so the overall kind of global environment is highly uncertain, and it's also just very, very difficult for I guess for markets, but people who rely on government policy to be able to make those forward-looking decisions, and that has a kind of self-reinforcing negative feedback loop, and that's one of the dangers, and that's partly why we've revised up our kind of recession risks for the kind of global economy, but alongside that, so for Europe as well.
Okay. Hital there from St James's Place, looking ahead to the spring statement. Thank you very much indeed. And staying with that particular, the spring statement tomorrow, obviously it's going to be eagerly anticipated by those companies bracing themselves for the measures that were announced actually in the budget, because they come into force next week, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises who are warning that they're going to be the hardest hit by both the rise in the minimum wage and, of course, that increase in employer national insurance contributions. Let's speak to Rachel Watkin, Managing Director of the Tiny Box Company. Rachel, very good morning to you. You would love the Chancellor to reverse those decisions, but it's not going to happen, don't you think? Oh, we can't hear you. I think you may well be on mute. Don't worry, we do this all the time ourselves.
It helps to take myself.
There you are. I mean, we could do an interview with trying to lip read, rather, but that might be quite difficult. Right, let's start that again. I was saying you'd love the Chancellor to change her mind, but it's looking unlikely, to be fair.
It is looking very unlikely, unfortunately, but I do wonder how much they have thought about the overall impact of what the national insurance and minimum wage increase is going to hit on small businesses. So just for us, it's going to add over £100,000 to our bottom line. And when you think about the reduction in corporation tax, the reduction in spending, which is going to impact VAT, what is the net result?
And it is a lot of money. I mean, particularly, as you say, big companies they don't like it, but they can absorb it. Whereas for you guys and others, it's a lot of extra money that ultimately gets passed on to consumers.
Well, this is the problem, because the UK at the moment is being flooded, especially in the retail sector, with low-value imports from direct D2C platforms in the UK. We can't just put our prices up, because if we put our prices up, it's just going to encourage consumers to buy even more from the Far East directly. So somehow we have to absorb it, and the only way to do that is to either lay people off or to automate our systems more effectively.
So if it gets to the point where the government don't change course on this, and as I say, that seems unlikely, what would you like to hear tomorrow from Rachel Reeves? Is there any other relief, if you like, the Chancellor can provide your business and others of similar size?
I think what I'd love to see is, I would hate for us to go the same route as Donald Trump. I'm not suggesting that at all, but to have more of a focus to buy British and to try and create a buy British culture. That would certainly help small businesses. I think opening up the opportunity for government tender for small businesses would help us. Also, business rates. Business rates for us are an absolute killer. We spend over £150,000 a year. Our premises are remote. We don't have any public transport links. We get rid of our own waste. So what are we actually paying for? Reductions in that would help a lot. But also the new employment bill that they're talking about coming in, again, that adds more red tape, that adds higher costs. There's a lot that can be done.
But Reggie, you touched upon it there. You said you don't want to go down the route of Donald Trump, but at the end of the day, you're also making the point that actually there's a lot of cheap goods from particularly East Asia, as you kind of said, kind of flooding the market, if you like. The response to that often is tariffs.
The response is tariffs at the moment. I don't think a lot of the UK public are aware that when they're buying parcels from these cheap platforms, anything under £39 in value, there is no VAT and there's no import duty. And that amounted to over 3 billion spending in the last year, where it didn't contribute to the British economy at all, and the money went out of the British economy.
OK, so the message is think again when you buy online, as you say, encourage people to buy British. Rachel, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we've heard there what small businesses think and want from that spring statement tomorrow. But of course, it all comes down to that wriggle room we were talking about that Rachel Reeves has in tomorrow's statement. Well, our economics editor, Ed Conway, has been looking at the figures.
Well, with the spring statement coming up tomorrow, here's a bit of a primer on the kinds of things to expect. And let's start with the big numbers, because at the main point, this was not supposed to be a big fiscal event. It was supposed to be mostly about the forecast changing, and what do they do for the big picture. So that big picture, it looks like it is going to change quite a lot. This is showing you the growth forecast, so gross domestic product forecast last time around. And you can see, just focus in particular on 2025 and 2026, the year we're in and the next one, they are almost certainly going to be downgraded. We don't know by precisely how much, but if you just take the consensus of forecasts out there from different economists, you're talking about an enormous cut, potentially halving the growth rate in the year we're in at the moment. And if you take that, so weaker growth, and alongside it, consider the fact that interest rates are higher. This is showing you, again, last time around, the Office of Budget Responsibility thought interest rates in the future years would look more or less like this. As it is, they are higher. So higher interest rates is where things are right now. Put those two things together. So weaker growth, higher interest rates, that basically means you're borrowing more. Your deficit's going to be higher. And that's a problem because the Chancellor has, we've talked about this a number of times before, haven't we? But it's worth just underlining it. She's got two fiscal rules, OK? And these fiscal rules, depending on how the government is doing against those fiscal rules, that determines how much headroom they have. You've probably heard the word headroom before. You're going to hear it a bit more, I'm afraid, because this is what it's all about. This is showing you the size of the deficit right now. The government's in deficit. It's borrowing a lot of money. And if it's going to meet I guess the most important of those fiscal rules, it needs to get that deficit down into positive territory, basically turn it into a surplus by 2029 to 30. So that is the fiscal rule. And when people talk about headroom, that's actually what they're talking about. It's the gap between that and that. So there's no kind of, gospel truth about this is headroom. That's the headroom. And it's against, importantly, it's against a fiscal rule that the Chancellor has committed to herself, OK? So if we take that headroom, and like I say, a lot of talk about it, but you're seeing now the reality of what it actually is. Take that headroom and recall that when Jeremy Hunt was Chancellor, it was about 13.6 billion. So that gap was about 13.6 billion pounds. Then actually, ahead of October, so ahead of the budget last October, the amount of headroom got better. So the deficit got smaller, or the surplus got bigger, however you want to call it. But that basically meant that actually the Chancellor had more room to play with. But she decided that she was going to spend extra money. So that took the headroom down to 9.9 billion pounds. More spending commitments. And worth just give a bit of perspective on that. That actually is one of the smallest amounts of headroom versus a fiscal rule that we have seen from most chancellors going back to George Osborne's time. As I say, it is against your rules, so there's nothing definitive about it. But nonetheless, that was quite low. She didn't leave herself all that much room, and lo and behold, those first two charts I showed you, growth is weaker, higher interest rates, all of that pushes down the amount of headroom. And now it looks like actually we're heading for a deficit right now, unless she does something. So the headroom's been almost entirely eliminated. And that brings us basically to this spring statement. It wasn't supposed to be a big fiscal event, but with that screaming at you, you kind of have to do something, or you have to throw out your fiscal rules, and the Chancellor says she wants to do something about it. And that is why we're likely to see more in the way of spending cuts, or at least smaller, less generous spending settlements in this spring statement. It's going to be a big event, far bigger than most people had expected. And it all comes back to that, headroom.
Well, if Ed whetted your appetite there, you can get much more from him, and indeed Beth Rigby and Sophie Ridge, with special coverage of the spring statement here on Sky News from 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. Now, let's move on and let's talk about drugs, because it's no secret this country and others, of course, have a big obesity problem. But analysis by Deloitte shows that the number of drugs that generate annual sales of at least $1 billion has increased. And despite the cost of creating new drugs going up, the top 20 global pharma companies have seen a rise in the profits from the research and development. Drugs which treat obesity and diabetes are fueling those returns. Let's speak to Karen Taylor, Director of Deloitte Centre for Health Solutions. Very good morning to you, Karen. This is, in many ways, actually quite a good news story, isn't it? In the sense that drug companies are spending more on R&D, they're coming up with better drugs, they may cost a bit more money, but they are trying to solve some of the big health problems that we face in this country.
That's right. It's a very exciting time for the industry as we're seeing a real surge in innovation. But it is also in contrast to what we saw over the past 10 years, where we saw declining internal rates of return. So what they're doing is now ticking back up towards what is a sensible rate of return.
And lots of this has been driven by R&D, which is great because that means universities and it means people and research. But frankly, also be honest about this, it involves technology and increasingly AI.
So it's certainly, and we are only talking about R&D. We're looking at the forecast returns from the R&D pipelines of the top 20 pharma companies. So yes, and over the past few years, there has been an increase in adoption of AI technologies and robotic process automation to try and improve the efficiency and productivity of the research and development function.
And just briefly, there is a downside, though. The cost of developing drugs is going up. And is that being passed on to consumers, to all of us?
So the average cost of the drugs in our pipeline has increased this year. It's an increase on last year's overall average cost at 2.3 billion. But the previous year was slightly lower. So it's steadying out, but it's still well above the 2 billion per drug, per asset in the pipeline that gets approved, because a lot of drugs don't make it through the research and development pipeline. So yes, it is concerning, but we are starting to see some improvements as a result of automation and the use of AI. But those also come with a cost, and that cost will take a little while to recoup.
Karen, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, the government has given the go-ahead for a multi-billion-pound project to build new tunnels under the Thames River here in London. It'll be known as the Lower Thames Crossing and will link Kent and Essex. It'll be around 14.5 miles in length and will connect the existing road network via 2 tunnels. It's hoped the route will reduce congestion and improve journey times and could be open as early as 2032. The emphasis, of course, on the word could there. Millwall FC has become the first British football club to launch its own 5G mobile network. The club announced their plans will start from just £10. It'll be powered by the 3 network, which of course is due to merge with Vodafone soon. Subscribers will receive special discounts and offers with the freedom to cancel whenever they want. The offering follows clubs including AC Milan, who have already launched their own branded networks overseas. We're going to talk about robots now because the first ever autonomous construction robot has been deployed in the UK. As the number of construction workers in the country falls to its lowest on record, the introduction of advanced technology is aimed to show the industry is sustainable and forward-thinking. Well, a bit earlier, I caught up with Alexander Morris, who essentially talked to me about these very innovative robots.
We are thinking about different ways to make the delivery of offices in a better place. And we happen to today be using a robot within a lift shaft to make sure that the quality of the product is as close as it can be for the future occupier using the space. So it's using the latest technology to improve and make things better. It is about thinking of health and safety. The robot is working in a space that doesn't need its safety barriers. It also, as you think about it, a person is drilling a hole within concrete. That's not a positive environment. And it's about creating a better place for people to work in the construction industry. And the robot needs to be controlled by others. So those that would be drilling the holes are actually sitting outside controlling the robot. So it's sort of creating a new job and making it better space in the industry. You do actually need the humans creating those finishing, but there are certain jobs that are absolutely ideal for robots, and they will take over. But the robot is creating precision, and precision makes things easier, more sustainable, less wastage. So actually, it's improving the future as much as as the past. And yes, it will take some jobs, but then the robots have to be created, then those create jobs, and it moves on as a better environment for delivering offices, etc. from our perspective. Using this robot we've got now, we actually first saw the prototype 2 years ago. So in 2 years, it's gone from a prototype to version 3. So it is improving very, very quickly. So I would suspect we're going to have a trajectory that will get quicker, and they will find ways to do work that is more challenging for a human. They will introduce robots to do it. So I think we're starting to see in the next 3 to 5 years a real increase in the use of robots. I mean, take examples of hoists, cranes, materials, movement. Robots will be able to do that in a defined way, in a very precise way, which is what we're trying to achieve, a better solution for the future.
Pretty nifty, wasn't it? That was Alexander Morris there from Bentall Green Oak. You're watching Sky News Business Live. Up next, the markets, the FTSE up to date. All the details in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. It's like Emirates. It's like better.
Let's get more on all that now with Russ Mould, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Russ, very good morning to you. Talk to me about Tesla.
Well, the shares had a massive rally yesterday. They were up 12%, which will be a relief to the patient shareholders who were taking Mr. Elon Musk's plea last week to hold on to their shares. I guess that was mainly because, well, let's face it, the share price has just halved, but equally any suggestion that tariffs may be postponed or changed from the 2nd of April would probably be positively received as well, given that Tesla may be in the firing line, given how important China is as a market for it.
And you, I see, are saying that the global stock markets needs a lot more action and a bit less conversation. What do you mean by that?
I think some peace and quiet would be a good thing. If you look at the volatility that we've seen recently, it's normally not a sign of a healthy market, or at least one that is maybe perhaps changing direction. If you look at when the technology, media and telecoms bubble burst in 2000, markets flopped around wildly for the next 2.5 to 3 years. And if anything, there were more big gains than there were big losses. But over time, investors walked into these rallies thinking that it was time to buy in the dip and were actually disappointed. So you don't want to see that again. And funny enough, we saw exactly that sort of day yesterday. You would like to see some more calm, market-wise, and dare one say it, policy-wise. If President Trump does give us a little bit of a break on tariffs, that might help. Markets are priced in a cooling in inflation, a reduction in interest rates, and steady growth. There is the fear at the moment that tariffs will knock the world off that path. So anything that gets it back towards it is likely to be well received by share investors.
And Russ, back home, let's talk about Kingfisher, owns B&Q and Screwfix, but they've seen a bit of a hit to the profits, haven't they?
Yeah, DIY is not my field of expertise, Darren, as Mrs. Moore will tell you.
You and me both.
No, it's just not my area at all. But the numbers, live down to a low set of expectations. And Thierry Garnier, the Chief Executive Officer, forecast for the coming year, wide range, the bottom of which suggested another drop in profits with weaker cash flow as well. We saw a big DIY boom in many households during lockdown. That's definitely cooled, and softer economies in the UK and France haven't helped either.
And just in 10 seconds, can you talk to me about Bellway?
Increased order book, increased reservation rates, looking a lot more positive than it was, and the share price at the moment at least trying to forge a bottom. Much will depend on where interest rates go from here. Ross
Mill, the man who can fit in the markets in 3 minutes, comprehensive. Thank you very much. And it's always a good business live when you can quote Elvis Presley and talk about Millwall in the same programme. Ross, thank you. That is it for me on Business Live for today. We're back, of course, at 4:30 this afternoon. We'll be talking to Millwall about their mobile phone network. Don't miss that. Up next, it's Gareth at 12. See you later. Bye-bye.